Hey, hey. Ta-da! Look at that. Yes. So did you get the answer to my riddle before I told it to you? And I do hope that you do not look at the witness videos, witness, Witness, from a film, because they'll be kind of pointless unless you combine them with what you are going to learn today about Calvinism. But before we get into that, yes, I'm kind of jazzed because it is Friday, and I'm looking forward to, not waking up tomorrow. Although, please never get the idea that doing this, teaching is my life, and so whether it's in the classroom, which I would much rather have, I'd much rather see you guys, or it's doing this, which is still teaching, but it's somewhat less satisfying. It's what I do. It's what did Batman say? It's what we do that defines us. And then his girlfriend dies. But anyway, back to the matter at hand. So today we are continuing our discussion on the Protestant Reformation. We are going to leave. We're going to leave Martin Luther for a while and enter the world of John Calvin. And I will be emailing you also a couple of things about John Calvin. Touching the nose again. I can't help it. It itches. I can't help it. I will be emailing you a couple of things about John Calvin, who was a reformer like Martin Luther. And actually, to be real honest, I find John Calvin a lot more interesting than Martin Luther. Even though a lot of people, a lot of people see John Calvin as the don't do that guy. And there is definitely room for that definition. But anyway, like I said, please, I hope that you've held off on watching the two witness videos. They will mean nothing except, interesting 3 witness videos. There'll be, oh, that's interesting. They're talking about the Amish. Well, what does Amish have to do with Calvinism? Well, the Amish are a descendant, are an offshoot of Calvinism, but we'll get to that. So, announcements. Like I said yesterday, don't be surprised if next week I am not broadcasting to you from the halls of my home. Actually, my office is in my bedroom, my home desktop computer, and so, I may be coming at you from that position. I also want to announce that, I was notified this morning that I have 100 subscribers on YouTube. Who would have thought? And our YouTubers pathetic narcissist? Well, like I said, the jury's still out on whether I'm a pathetic narcissist. Yeah, I'm a narcissist. You can tell by the way I dress. I've taken Casual Friday to a new low. Come on, black t-shirt, but it does have a pocket, At any rate, so let's talk about the Protestant Reformation, shall we? So, Protestant Reformation, Calvinism. To say that Protestant Reformation was solely about religion was just like saying that the American Revolution was about freedom from tyranny, or the American Civil War was solely about states' rights. It's just not so. Protestant Reformation, it was about religion, but it was also just as much about political power and money. Many political leaders at that time, kings and dukes, did not like the fact that simply by waving the threat of going to hell in front of the faces of the people of the parish, the Roman Catholic Church could require not only 10% of that person's income, but could also command tremendous authority, tremendous respect. They could basically make you jump. That many did not think that the Roman Catholic Church deserved. It says there to look at your map on page 223 of Adventures in the Human Spirit. All the map does is tell you this, that regarding the Protestant Reformation, Southern and most of Western Europe, France and Spain, remained staunchly Catholic, but Northern Europe, Germany, Norway, Sweden, Denmark, became Protestant, and of course later on England became Protestant. Does that have anything to do with the distance from Rome, the seat of the Catholic Church, to Northern Europe? Absolutely does. Yes, it does. But anyway, as it says there, you can see the Reformation movement is stronger, particularly in areas that are geographically removed from the center of the Roman Catholic Church, that being Rome. Luther's teachings, yes, Martin Luther, still talking about him just for a short amount, were widely supported in northern Germany by the ruling monarchs of these provinces. They, and I mentioned this yesterday, saw Luther as a way to get out from under Rome, to get out from under having to send 10% of the treasury, 10% of the income generated in their kingdom southward and never seeing any more of it on a regular basis in their own land, so that if that income stayed in northern Germany, they could tax it. Another person who used religion as an opportunity for political gain was Henry VIII. But we're going to, like it says in your study guide, we're going to talk about that guy later. Interesting guy. Luther's teachings also inspired something called the Peasant Revolt. Now, if you recall, I sent you, when we first got started, a YouTube video on Rick Steves talking about the Protestant Reformation. And in that, and perhaps in your World Civ classes, you learned about the Peasant Revolt. The peasants, when they first began to hear about Martin Luther's message, many peasants saw it, Martin Luther is talking about not freedom of the spirit, but actual freedom and getting out from under the rule of their lords. And it inspires what has been called in Europe the Peasant Revolt. Well, at first Martin Luther was like, okay, wow, that's interesting. Then when Martin Luther saw that these peasants were not just, refusing to work, they were rising up and gathering weapons and putting their hands on, in other words, Germany turned to chaos. Martin Luther then turns around and encourages the nobility of Germany to not only put down this revolt, but to put it down without mercy. I forget the exact number, but I think it's like 160,000. 160,000, I think, peasants died in the Peasant Revolt. We're about to get into. Oh boy. This Protestant Reformation we're about to get into is really, really going to rock Europe. It is amazing the number of people who die because of minor differences in religion or the way it's taught. And this is just one example. Which quickly erupted across Europe because peasants interpreted Luther's teachings as a message for freedom from them. Luther at first supported these uprisings. However, when he saw firsthand the violence, bloodshed, and destruction, he changed his mind. He then tacitly, the word tacitly means kind of like, okay, gave his approval to the nobility's merciless suppression of these revolts. Oh, I'm sorry. I actually have the statistic written right here. 300,000 peasants died in these revolts, about the population of what is now Boone and Kenton counties put together. Because of that, the peasant populations, and this is interesting, after that, the peasant populations, who at first listened to Martin Luther and listened to the Protestant message, message, they said, forget that. We are now going to cling tightly to Roman Catholicism. And that'll be kind of solid all throughout Europe, all throughout history, that the peasants will be staunch Roman Catholics from here on out. Roman numeral 3. Okay. Following in the footsteps of Martin Luther and yet deviating from him. And see, that's one thing. That's one thing that typifies the Protestant Reformation. You know, in the good old days, and I'm still learning about how to do assignments. I'm still learning about Canvas. I mean, this is, you know, this is really a learning curve for me. But in the good old days, back when we used to actually meet together as a school, when we went through this particular unit, one of the exercises that I would give the class, one of the homework assignments that I would give the class is, and it was actually a really easy thing to do, would be to submit a list. Submit a list of churches in this area. And what you had to do, you had to imagine that Ryle is the center of the universe. And in a 10-mile radius from Ryle, you would have to list 25 different churches in that 10-mile radius. And, well, oh, that'd be so terrible, so hard. Well, you know what? It's really not. I mean, most of us, as we drive down the road, just drive past churches and never give them a second thought. I mean, goodness, within 1,000 yards of this building alone, there are 2 different churches, you know, with 1,000 yards. And if you keep going down the road, or if you keep going to the west or to the east or to the south, you will run across more. There are just churches all over the place. In fact, probably in the United States, there are more churches per capita than any other country in the world. Notice, and I should say church buildings. There are more church buildings per capita than any other country in the world. And people in the United States are still going to it, as opposed to Europe. But yes, and by the way, and you can thank that number of churches, you can thank the Protestant Reformation. Because, and here was my point originally, because when this Protestant Reformation begins, the Protestant church, now the Roman Catholic Church stays pretty solid from literally here on out. The Roman Catholic Church is one church. It hasn't had any more major splits since 1517. But the Protestant churches continue to divide and divide and subdivide and divide again. There are offshoots. I mean, there are probably about 10 to 15, for example, 10 to 15 different Baptist churches. And I mean Baptist denominations in this country. The 2 biggest ones are, of course, the National Baptist and the Southern Baptist. The National Baptist Church and the Southern Baptist Church, which split in 1861 over the question of, do we get to own slaves or not? You know, so yeah. Point of the matter is that split is going to go on. But one of the earliest guys is your friend and mine, John Calvin, who, like I said, I find more interesting than Martin Luther. And Calvin has a larger influence than just religion. So let's look at it. So all of us, that was John Calvin. And notice, if you have your study guide, hopefully you do, I mentioned Calvin and Hobbes. Calvin and Hobbes, who, I wish we were in class now. I would say, who can tell me who are Calvin and Hobbes? And somebody would put their hand up and they would say, oh, it's a little cartoon. It's a comic strip that back in the days of newspapers, you actually had funny pages. You actually had funny pages and, you know, a comic strip. And the comic strip featured 2 primary characters, one named Calvin, one named Hobbes. Calvin was the little boy, and Hobbes was his toy tiger. Do you remember this? Do you remember the cartoon? And in the cartoon, Calvin, I mean, the most common joke of all is that Calvin and his toy tiger Hobbes, well, Hobbes could only be seen or come active when it's just Calvin and Hobbes alone. And the biggest prank of all would be like Calvin would come in from school or come into a building, and the toy tiger Hobbes would tackle him. And, he would surprise him, he would jump him, and, then they would say something funny. However, if you really followed the entire, and you can buy Calvin and Hobbes, the entire series in bookstore. Perhaps some of your parents bought it for you when you were a kid. If you really read all of Calvin and Hobbes, a whole lot of the Calvin and Hobbes comics are dedicated to rather deep philosophical conversations between Calvin and Hobbes, where they just simply sit around and talk about, for example, the nature of mankind, what is good. And then they'll say something funny at the end to make it a funny, but so once again, why did that author, it's not Berkey Breathed, it's somebody else, Paul Bloom? I don't know. But anyway, why did he choose those two names? Well, one of the answers is John Calvin. He named the characters little boy John Calvin after John Calvin. Hobbes is somebody we'll learn about later on, a guy named Thomas Hobbes. Thomas Hobbes was a philosopher whose most famous quotation was that without the strong rule of the state, life would be nasty, brutish, and short. Yeah. Without the strong rule of the state, people would mob Kroger and take all the toilet paper. Yeah. Saw a cartoon a while back on Facebook. It showed these people from the future, walking through the ruins left over from 21st century civilization, and said, they all died of coronavirus, but they were hygienically clean. Actually, they said, had a more crude way of saying it, but you get the drift. So back to the matter at hand. John Calvin was a contemporary of Martin Luther. In other words, John Calvin, who lived about the same time as Martin Luther, they knew of each other. Okay. And John Calvin agreed with Martin Luther on several issues concerning the Reformation of the Christian faith. However, he and Luther disagreed on one key issue. That issue, and that's a big one, is called, it has two names. One, some people call it predestination, and others call it predetermination. Now, this is why I miss not having you in class. I would have written the word up on the board, P-R-E, and then destination, D-E, as in destination, D-E-S-T-I-N-A-T-I-O-N. Predestination or predetermination. And that's the big thing. And so what is predestination or predetermination that John Calvin believed in, Martin Luther didn't? Well, it simply boils down to this. Predestination means that since God is omnipotent and omniscient, don't you love these big words? Omnipotent and omniscient. Omnipotent means all powerful. Omniscient means all knowing. But I thought you were all knowing, Mr. Horton. Well, that's another story. But yeah, omniscient means all knowing. Since God is all knowing, and since, once again, the primary thing on everybody's mind in the Middle Ages, here in the Reformation, is who goes to heaven. And in actuality, if you read the book of Revelation talks about how who is going to heaven is revealed on the last day. When Jesus comes back, Jesus has the Lamb's book of life, and inside the book of life, which is sealed, by the way. Inside the book of life, there is the list, and nobody knows who's in the list. Well, John Calvin says that since God is omniscient, not only does he, of course, know who's on the list, but he has known who is on the list since before the dawn of time. Yeah, before the dawn of time. Before the people were even born. Before anybody was born. Now, once again, you might go, how does that make a difference for anything? Well, it makes a lot of difference. It makes a whole lot of difference in one's outlook on life. Because think about it. If it is already predetermined that a person is going to go to heaven or is going to go to the other place, then what does it matter what you do? What does it matter what you do regarding living a good life, regarding, being a moral person, regarding loving your neighbor, regarding not robbing the 7-Eleven, what does it matter? And so that it does make a tremendous difference. All right, now we're going to get back to that in a minute, but let me continue to go through this just to make sure I don't leave anything out. My study guides are really actually, I spend a lot of time in comprising them to make sure I didn't leave out any important details. So that's why I have to keep checking back into them. So let's see. Okay, predestination is belief that basically eliminates the effect of free will. Oh, yes, see, I forgot about free will. Now, for those of you who are Roman Catholics, and I know I have a couple in my class, Roman Catholics believe in what is called free will. You say, what does that mean? Free will means that the person makes the choice. The person makes the choice over what he does, and his actions determine whether or not he goes to heaven or the other place. Martin Luther also believes in free will. However, John Calvin and Calvinist faith believe in this thing called predetermination, predestination. So, and once again, it gets back to the idea, think about it. You ask yourself, what does it matter what I do then? Well, it matters. Think about it. Let's pretend that you have lived a very righteous life. You've been a very moral person all your life. You've been very conscious. You have obeyed all the edicts of your faith and or Christianity or both, and been a good person. And then suddenly, at the very end of your life, something goes off in your head and you commit the greatest, most vile sin possible that harms a tremendously large number of people. You commit a terrible sin that is unpardonable. And there are sins listed, cardinal sins, mortal sins, they're called, sins that have no redemption. And so at the end of your life, you commit a mortal sin. And what would a Calvinist say about that? Well, a Calvinist would say, well, God knew that was going to happen already. That's why he had already not written your name in the book of life. On the other hand, what if you remember the story when Jesus was on the cross with the two thieves, the one on the left starts saying, hey, Jesus, since we're up here and you're so all-powerful, why don't you get us down? And the other thief says, hey, man, leave the guy alone, okay? We deserve to be up here. He doesn't. And then he turns to Jesus and says, hey, would you remember me? And Jesus said to him, on this day you shall be with me in paradise. In other words, this guy who had been a rotten person all his life makes a last second conversion, gains entry into heaven, at least according to most interpretations of that story. And so what would a Calvinist say about that? Calvinists would say God knew that from the beginning. And so way before time, God wrote thief on the right in the Lamb's Book of Life. Okay. Believe it or not, this is all going somewhere. It's a very key concept, not just in religion, but also in the thinking system of Western man. All right, back to that hand. Predestination believes that God, since God is all-powerful and all-knowing, that God has known since before time began which human beings were going to go to heaven and which were going to go to hell, and there is nothing that those individual human beings can do about that circumstance. This knowledge is also a hugely closely guarded secret and is kept, and this much comes from the book of Revelation in the New Testament in the Lamb's Book of Life, and will not be open until Judgment Day when Jesus comes back to put the world at end. And those whose names are not in the book of those whose names are in the book go to heaven and live with Jesus and the angels and forever and ever and ever. Amen. And those who do not get to reside in a much more unpleasant dwelling with Satan and his minions. Okay. Of course, the issue was, how do you know? How do you know if your name's on the list or not? I mean, you don't. So why don't I just go out and party all the time and then, live out my life the way I want to? Well, the Calvinists would say, God knew you were going to say that, and therefore, name's not on the list. Sorry. So you may not have to live a moral life, do the right things, and then I will be judged better. And God knew you were going to do that, so your name is on the list. Okay. So, according to Calvinist theology, God leaves little clues or hints or intimations of the presuppositions of what is called God's elect. God's elect means God's favor. God leaves little clues as to whether or not he has written your name. What are these clues? Well, we're going to get back to that in a minute. For now, let's just talk about some of the basic tenets of Calvinism and by de facto Protestantism. Here's where we get really into it. We're going to get back to that question in a minute. A good Calvinist would not. This is why oftentimes the Calvinists are thought of as the you can't do that religion. A good Calvinist would not gamble. Why? Because gambling, well, think about it. If you ever walked into a gambling casino, you ever seen a gambling casino? Where do you think they get the money to put all those bright lights and bells and all those things that make the gambling casino attractive? They get it from the losers who walk in there and lose their money. And so that's irresponsible with God's gifts. A good Calvinist would not dance because dancing is looked upon as a waste of time. Not only that, but an encouragement of carnal behavior. I mean, come on, didn't you ever watch Footloose? A good Calvinist would not play cards. Once again, waste of time. A waste of time, frivolous activity, and encourages gambling. A good Calvinist would not sing frivolous songs. What are frivolous songs? Well, most of the songs that I've sent you by YouTube are frivolous songs. Could be classified as frivolous. Strictly speaking, frivolous songs are any songs that do not have to do with praising God. Yeah, and so there. And a good Calvinist would not wear gaudy clothes. Pardon me for a minute. Thank you. A good Calvinist would not wear gaudy clothes. What are gaudy clothes? Clothes that draw attention. Bright colors, for example. Fashion, for example. Tight fitting, for example, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Clothes that are unnecessarily expensive. You see a lot of Calvinists, a lot of the Protestants throughout history, their dress is very plain, you see. But wait a minute. Calvinists are not all a rainy day. A good Calvinist would do certain things. For example, A good Calvinist would work hard. Yeah, do his homework. A good Calvinist would work hard to make his farm better, his house better, his business better. Yeah, a good Calvinist would be industrious, be productive, to raise his status, to put money in his pocket. Yeah, to put money in his pocket, to make his family's life and his condition better. And a good Calvinist would save his money. That's why he doesn't gamble. A good Calvinist would put money in the bank, stick it away. And a good Calvinist would be ambitious. A good Calvinist would not want to be in the club. A good Calvinist would want to be president of the club. A good Calvinist would not want to make okay grades. A good Calvinist would want to make the best grades. Ambition, you see. Yes, moving forward. Acquire possessions, actually. Now, hold on. Now, once again, you do these things honestly as a Calvinist. You don't go and rob, somebody to make yourself richer. You don't go and cheat people to make yourself richer, but you work hard to improve your status. I mean, you accumulate property. You see, I mean, Job was a wealthy man, and he was a man who walked with God, if you recall. Okay, now let's go back to those two clues, shall we? One of the things that God lets us know, according to Calvinist teaching, who is going to heaven, because people who go to heaven practice the do's and don'ts of things I just mentioned, good Calvinism. But one sure sign of God's favor, one sure sign of God's elect, according to John Calvin, was if a person had lots of children. And this, by the way, that having lots of children as a sign of God's favor is an idea that goes far back in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. That having large families was like a sign that God likes you, because obviously, if he likes you, he wants more people like you, therefore, lots of children. That's one thing. But now, the other thing, this was earth-shattering. John Calvin believed that one of the signs of God's elect was if you were prosperous, if you made money, if you did well in business, if you were productive. That meant that you had God's seal of approval. And that is earth-shattering. Because, think about it, for as long as Christianity has been around, the teachings of Christianity has always been that, the love of money is the root of all evil. In fact, Jesus himself said that it was easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than it was for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. And Jesus said that. Now, unfortunately, the translation of the Bible like that, it's kind of inaccurate. So let me help you here. Now, we're not talking about the animal. Well, actually, we are talking about the animal, the camel. The eye of a needle, by the way, instead of being this thing that we used to sew with, the eye of a needle was regarded as the smallest door in the city. And you could get, it's difficult because camels aren't the most cooperative animals in the world, but you could do that. So a person could be, Jesus said, you can be wealthy, but it's difficult. You can't love God and mammon at the same time. But John Calvin is saying, though, being prosperous, sign of God's elect. That is going to be a game changer. Think about it. Think of this. I'm asking you this. For one thing, how many of you guys are driving your parents nuts right now? How many of you guys, your parents walk in there and what are you doing? You're sitting on the couch. Maybe you're watching TV. Maybe you're doing this. I have never seen that before. It just reminded me of somebody. I can't remember who. But anyway, have you ever been in that position and not doing anything? And that's just it. And your parents yell at you. And what do? They make you do something. You know, clean your room or do something productive. They want you to. For that, you can thank John Calvin. It's called the Protestant work ethic, boys and girls. And for that, you can thank John Calvin. Yes. Protestant work ethic. And see what I'm telling you? From that idea that God has known since the dawn of time who all is going to heaven, to get up and clean your room. See? Now, Calvinism spread throughout Europe in pockets as well as in North America, which when you watch that video today, one of the Calvinist sects are Amish. And if you want to see John Calvin's do your work and not dancing, then watch those 3 videos when I finish this lecture course. Hopefully now that would make sense to you. I mean, the movie Witness, it's on Netflix. And if you're not doing anything, it's a movie out of the 80s. I mean, it's a detective drama. It's about a little Amish boy who, while traveling through Philadelphia, witnesses a murder that's committed by policemen, and he's the only witness. Get it? The play on words, witness, which in Christianity you're supposed to witness about the truth of God. And to protect the little boy, your hero of mine, Harrison Ford, playing this very roughshod Philadelphia detective named John Book, takes the little boy and his mother and hides out with him in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. If you want to find, the biggest Amish city in the world is Lancaster, Pennsylvania, full of Amish and full of tourists. But the Amish fascinate me. But let me give you a hint, and I think I've said this before, but one day when all this is over and you can go to a restaurant, find an Amish restaurant. Find an Amish restaurant, and if it's like Thanksgiving. I swear, there is no better cooks on the planet than the Amish. Now, it's real comfort food. I mean, a steady diet of you will make you into me. But once in a while, unfortunately, there are no Amish restaurants in the general Cincinnati area. But if you ever go to Sarasota, Florida, there's like 5 or 6. Sarasota, that area, there's like 5 or 6. You can find them also scattered out in upper northern Ohio. So if your parents ever drive up through there, the rural part reaches of Ohio, there are actually more Amish who live in Ohio than in Pennsylvania. But there's this one big cluster in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. But anyway, if you watch those 3 videos, you see what John Calvin is talking about in the do's and don'ts: not wearing the gaudy clothes, not gambling, working hard, being industrious. For some reason, the Amish are fascinated with living without technology. However, I will go on and say that in addition to that, Amish farms and businesses are amazingly productive. And their children, quite interestingly, by Supreme Court order, do not have to go to school past the 8th grade. Amish children are also given a year called Rumenspringa, where they are allowed to basically choose if they want to leave the Amish lifestyle and go out and live like them English, which is what they call Yankees like you and me, non-Amish, or come back and live the Amish style. Well, very good, Mr. Halleck, Wisconsin versus Yoder. I knew that, and I'm happy that you did. Quite correct, Wisconsin versus Yoder. And by the way, all you guys who I'm seeing the live chats, I really, really, really appreciate you. But yeah, but anyway, if you want to If you want to live, go to an Amish restaurant. But in watch, and I would watch the whole film. I mean, if you're not doing anything, go to Netflix, watch Witness. It's a great film. It shows you the Amish lifestyle. And unfortunately, I mean, it's rated R, but maybe your parents will forgive you for that. But it's an excellent film because you get to see the Amish lifestyle. You get to see what John Calvin was talking about and how it manifested itself. But yeah, Amish businesses in America, their farms, and remember, they don't use technology, have a remarkably high level of financial success in a day when family farms are shutting down left and right in this country. In fact, you can't find family farms. The Amish are out there clicking still. Okay. By the way, last thing we talk about Calvinists. Learn the three primary sects of Calvinism. They will be on your test. The Huguenots. In France, as it says there, Calvinists were called Huguenots and were a persecuted minority by the Roman Catholics in France. In the Netherlands, they were called the Dutch Reformed Church. Now, if you ever go up in Michigan, in the western part of Michigan, there you'll find lots of Dutch living and lots of people in the Dutch Reformed Church. In fact, in western Michigan, it's kind of odd, there are actually more Dutch Reformed churches than there are Roman Catholics, which is very unusual in the North, in the Yankee North. In fact, in Grand Rapids, Michigan, there is a Calvinist college, and guess what it's called? Calvin. It's called Calvin University. Ta-da! And finally, in Scotland, the Calvinists formed wait for it, the Presbyterians. Yeah. 1,000 yards away from me, that church on 42, that's a Presbyterian church. It came over from Scotland to the United States. They're Scottish Calvinists. Presbyterians are Scottish Calvinists. That's the one you're probably most familiar with. Okay, I went a little over today, class 42 minutes. I hope you have a great weekend. And like I said, tomorrow morning, I intend to sleep in a little. But yeah, I hope you have the best of weekends. And I hope that one day that I get to see you all in here again and get to yell at you for sleeping in my lecture. But for now, that's going to do it. Thank you all. We'll talk about our good friend, King Henry VIII. Yes. Thank you.